The sun sank low behind the great trees, casting a golden glow upon the village of Lwanga. Nestled deep within the heart of the vast forest, the village stood like a living testament to the ancient ways of the ancestors. The huts, crafted from mud and thatch, lined the dirt paths where children played and women carried baskets of grain on their heads. The people lived in harmony with the land, guided by traditions passed down through generations. The elders spoke of the unseen spirits that whispered through the trees, and the villagers listened, for they knew that the balance between the physical and spiritual worlds was sacred. In the evening, the villagers gathered around the fire, singing songs of the past, recounting the deeds of their forefathers. The air was filled with the smoke of burning herbs, the scent of roasted meat, and the steady rhythm of drums. It was a world where the past lived as much as the present, and every action was weighed against the wisdom of those who had come before. But there was an unease that lingered over the village, a weight that could not be ignored. The chief, a towering figure whose presence commanded respect, walked among the people with grace and authority. His face, weathered by years of wisdom, carried the mark of someone who had seen many seasons. His eyes, though, held something more, a mystery. The villagers, though they loved him for his strength and leadership, could not shake the feeling that there was something hidden behind his silence. Each evening, the chief would sit at his hut, surrounded by his closest advisors, his thoughts guarded. The village had flourished under his rule, but now, as crops failed and the land grew restless, the people wondered if the chief held more than just knowledge. Whispers began to spread through the village, carried by the wind and the low murmur of the elders. Some believed that the chief possessed a power beyond his station, something tied to the very heart of the village itself. They wondered, with fear in their hearts, if his power was the reason for the village's struggles, or perhaps the key to its salvation. The elders, whose white hair marked them as the bearers of wisdom, gathered often to discuss the chief's growing isolation. They had seen leaders rise and fall, watched kingdoms flourish and fade, and yet the chief's silence troubled them. They knew that a ruler's power must come with the openness of the heart, the willingness to share the burden of leadership. But this chief, though wise and strong, kept his secrets close. "We must trust him," said Elder Kofi, his voice like the deep rumble of thunder. "He is the keeper of our ways, the protector of our people. But we must ask, why does he not speak of the sacred drum? Why does he remain silent when the village needs him most?" The other elders nodded, their faces etched with concern. They had grown old, their bones weary from years of service, but they knew that the future of the village depended on the chief's willingness to reveal the truth. But the chief remained distant, his eyes clouded with a sorrow they could not understand. Kofi, a young warrior whose heart burned with ambition, paced in the shadows. He was strong, quick, and eager to prove himself. Though he had earned his place among the village's finest, he dreamed of more, of leadership, of guiding the people to greatness. Kofi was not content to sit in the shadows of others, not when he believed that the village's future depended on bold action. "The chief has grown weak," Kofi muttered to himself. "The village needs a leader who will act, not one who hides behind silence. If I am to become the one they follow, I must be the one who breaks the chains that bind us to the past." He often visited the elders, asking questions about the sacred drum. Its presence in the chief's hut was known to all, but its power was a secret wrapped in the folds of mystery. "The drum holds the wisdom of our ancestors," Kofi was told, "and with it, the strength of our people." But Kofi believed there was more. What if the drum holds more than wisdom, he wondered. What if it holds the key to the village's future? The sacred drum, carefully guarded and placed at the heart of the chief's hut, was said to contain the very soul of the ancestors. Its beating rhythm was a call to the spirits, a bond between the seen and the unseen. The villagers respected it, but they feared it too. The stories told of the drum's power, its ability to unite or to destroy, depending on who held it and how it was used. Some said it was a gift, others believed it was a curse, bound to the very earth on which the village stood. Kofi, in his restless pursuit of the truth, began to see the drum as more than just a symbol. "If only I could see," It with my own eyes, he thought. Perhaps then I would understand what holds the chief in such thrall. The village was in the grip of a crisis. The rains had failed for 2 seasons, and the crops that had once flourished were now withered and dry. The people, once strong and proud, now looked to the chief for guidance, but he had grown more distant with each passing day. The elders spoke of hope, but their voices were tinged with uncertainty. They spoke of the sacred drum, but even they knew that its secret had not been shared for many years. "Do you think the chief knows what to do?" asked a young man, his voice filled with desperation. "Why does he not speak? Why does he not lead us as he once did?" One elder sighed, his gaze long and heavy. "The chief knows, but his heart is burdened. There are things hidden within that drum, things we may not be ready to understand. If we do not find the courage to ask him, the village may be lost." Kofi, watching from afar, felt the weight of the village's despair settle like a stone on his heart. "I will find the truth," he vowed, his voice firm with resolve. "The village's future depends on it. I will uncover what the chief is hiding, even if it means defying the very traditions that bind us." As the moon rose high, casting a pale light across the village, Kofi's mind was set. He would seek the truth, no matter the cost. The stage was set, and the threads of fate began to tighten around Kofi, the chief, and the village. The future of Lwanga hung in the balance, and the path forward was veiled in mystery and danger. Would Kofi find the answers he sought, or would the village be forever bound by the secrets of the sacred drum? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: the journey to uncover the truth had begun. The air in the village of Lwanga had become thick with whispers. The evening fire flickered, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the villagers, who huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed voices. Their words carried a weight of fear and fascination. The sacred drum, which had long been an emblem of unity and tradition, was now the subject of suspicion. "I heard it can give a man the power to control the spirits of the forest," one villager murmured, his voice trembling with excitement. "It can make him stronger than any chief before him." Another, more skeptical, shook his head. "Power, yes, but at what cost? They say the drum holds a curse, a weight that no man can bear without losing his soul." Kofi stood in the shadows, listening intently. The murmurs twisted in his mind like a vine, each word feeding his growing curiosity. The more he heard, the more his suspicions grew. Was the drum truly a gift from the ancestors? Or was it a hidden danger that could destroy everything the village had built? Kofi's heart raced with the knowledge that he might be the one to uncover the truth. His desire for leadership, for the strength to guide his people, clashed with the fear of what he might find. What if the drum was the source of the village's troubles? What if the chief, the man who commanded their respect and love, had kept it secret to himself for too long? That night, Kofi lay awake on his mat, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. His mind was torn, like a hunter faced with 2 paths, one leading to his family's home, the other to the unknown. His loyalty to the village and the chief held him back, but his ambition, his need to prove himself, urged him forward. "I am not a child," Kofi whispered to himself. "I am a warrior. The people need a leader who will act, not wait for the winds to change. If the chief will not speak, then I must." His heart beat faster as he imagined what it would be like to stand before the villagers, not as a young man with dreams, but as their leader, the one who could guide them through the darkness. But what if the chief was right? What if the village did not need to uncover the truth? The drum had been kept safe for generations, its power contained. The elders had warned him before. Some things were best left untouched. Yet, in the silence of the night, the temptation to know grew stronger. Kofi knew he would not rest until he understood the truth behind the sacred drum. The next morning, as the sun rose over the village, the elders gathered in a circle, their faces heavy with the burden of their years. Their conversation was serious, the weight of their words pressing down on the air like a storm cloud. Kofi approached them, hoping to hear some guidance, some answer to the questions that had plagued his mind. Elder Kofi, the oldest of them, all looked at him with weary eyes. You ask about the drum, my son, but some questions are not meant for you to answer. But the village is dying, Kofi replied, his voice filled with urgency. The crops fail, the people suffer. If the drum holds the answer, then I must know. The elder's eyes softened. The drum was never meant to save or destroy the village. It is a symbol of our connection to the past, a link between the living and the dead. To Distu. Kofi entered the hut quietly, his eyes searching for the object that had haunted his thoughts. There it stood, in the center of the room, carved from ancient wood, covered in symbols known only to the elders, and bound with leather. The sacred drum seemed to pulse with energy, as if it were alive, waiting for someone to touch it. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against its surface, when a voice stopped him cold. What do you think you're doing? It was Amma, the chief's daughter. Her eyes, usually warm and filled with love, now burned with anger. You should not be here, Kofi. You do not understand what you're meddling with. Kofi stood frozen, his heart racing. Amma, I have to know. The village, the crops, the sickness, the silence from the chief. It all points to the drum. It holds the answers. I must see it. Amma stepped closer, her expression softening, but her voice was firm. You don't understand. The drum is sacred. Disturbing. It, breaking its bond with the spirits, could bring disaster. You cannot challenge what the ancestors have placed in our hands. Kofi's mind swirled with doubt and fear. Was he doing the right thing? But his ambition, his desire for leadership, pushed him forward. I cannot sit and watch as the village withers, he said, his voice trembling. If the chief refuses to speak, then I will. Amma's eyes filled with silent sorrow. She stepped aside, but not without a final warning. You are playing with forces beyond your understanding. Be careful, Kofi. Days passed, and Amma's words weighed heavily on Kofi. Despite her warning, he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. He continued his search for the truth, listening to the elders' fragmented stories about the sacred drum. They spoke of a powerful ritual once performed, one that tied the chief's fate to the village's survival. But the details were unclear, lost in the mists of time. Kofi learned that the drum had once been used to call upon the spirits, to seek guidance in times of crisis. But now, the chief kept it hidden, refusing to speak of its past. The village's survival, Kofi realized, was tied to the drum in ways he had never imagined. It was not just a symbol, it was a part of their very being, their connection to the spirits and the land. The chief, upon hearing rumors of Kofi's actions, became defiant. He refused to yield to the elders' calls for truth. The village must face its trials without relying on the old ways, he declared. The sacred drum is not the answer. We must find our own strength, or we will perish. His words were like fire, igniting a fierce division in the village. The younger generation, hungry for change, saw the chief's refusal as a betrayal. The world is changing, Kofi argued. We cannot keep living in the past. The elders, on the other hand, saw Kofi's defiance as a challenge to everything they held dear. This is the path to destruction, they said. You are not just questioning the chief, you are questioning our very way of life. The village was torn apart. The tension between the old and the new, between tradition and progress, became a rift that threatened to divide them forever. Kofi's quest for truth, his defiance of the chief's authority, had set the village on a path of conflict. The struggle between the generations grew more intense, and the future of Lwanga hung in the balance. Would Kofi's defiance lead to a new beginning, or would it destroy the village that had sustained them for generations? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. The struggle for power, truth, and survival had only just begun. Kofi had been waiting for this moment, the moment when he could finally unlock the secret that had tormented him for so long. Shut. Weight of the village's future pressed on his shoulders like an unbearable stone. With Amma by his side, They crept through the still night, the moon casting long shadows over the earth. Each step was a heartbeat closer to the truth, and their hearts beat loudly, louder than the whispers that had filled the air for days. Amma's hand trembled as she grasped the door to the chief's hut. She had never been this close to the sacred drum, yet it was as though she had always known its power. "Are you sure about this, Kofi?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kofi looked at her, his eyes full of fire. "We have no choice, Amma. The village is dying in its silence. We must know what is hidden." Together, they slipped inside, the door creaking softly as it closed behind them. The hut was dimly lit, the firelight from the corner flickering against the shadows. At the center, on a pedestal, stood the sacred drum, ancient and powerful, its skin weathered with time. Kofi and Amma approached it slowly, as though even the air itself might shudder at their presence. As their fingers brushed the surface of the drum, a shiver ran down Kofi's spine. The room seemed to hum with an energy he could not explain. Just as he reached for the drum, the door swung open with a force that rattled the walls. "Who dares disturb the sacred silence?" a voice boomed. The chief's presence filled the room, and Kofi's heart skipped a beat. Amma froze, her breath caught in her chest. Standing in the doorway, the chief's tall figure loomed, his eyes sharp with the weight of years. His face was both wise and sorrowful, the lines etched deep from carrying the village's burdens. Kofi and Amma stood motionless, caught in the act, their hearts pounding like the drum they had sought to understand. The chief took a step forward, his voice low and heavy. "You seek answers, Kofi? You wish to know the truth of the sacred drum?" Kofi felt his throat tighten, but he managed to speak. "We only want to understand, Chief. The village whispers, and I cannot ignore it any longer." The chief's gaze softened, but his voice was firm. "The drum you seek is not just wood and skin, Kofi. It is the heart of the village itself, bound by blood and power. You will learn its secret, but you may not survive it." There was a pause, as if time itself had held its breath. The chief slowly walked toward the drum, and as he did, the room seemed to darken, as though the very air was drawing in on them. "The truth," the chief said, his voice trembling with a sorrow that only years of leadership could bring, "is that this drum is not merely a symbol. It is the vessel of my father's soul. When he died, he did not leave us. He became one with the drum. His spirit resides within it, and it binds my life to this village." Kofi's eyes widened. Amma gasped, her hand going to her mouth. The chief continued, his voice growing more fragile. "If the drum is ever tampered with, if its power is unlocked by another, my life will end. And with my death, the village will fall into chaos, the land will wither, and our people will suffer." Kofi stood frozen, the weight of the chief's words sinking into his chest. The village's survival had always been tied to this drum, this unspoken bond. But now, Kofi understood. The chief's fear was not for his own life, but for the future of the people who depended on him. "This power," the chief said, his eyes reflecting years of struggle, "is both a curse and a blessing. It has kept us safe, but it has also held us back. The curse of the drum has kept the village from growing, from embracing change. But if we are united, if we face the truth together, the drum's power can guide us into the future. The past cannot bind us forever." Kofi's heart ached with the decision before him. To reveal the truth would destroy everything, to bring an end to the chief's life and risk the village's collapse. But to keep it hidden would mean to live in silence, under the shadow of an unspoken truth that poisoned everything. Amma's voice broke the silence. "Father," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "let go of the past. The village cannot move forward if we are bound by the ghosts of what was. The drum has held us in its grip for too long. It is time to free the people." Chiri's Diao welled up in the chief's eyes as he looked at his daughter. For the first time, the hardness in his heart seemed to soften, and the burden of years seemed to weigh a little less. "Amma," he whispered, his voice full of regret, "you are right. I have held on to this power for too long. I have been afraid to face the truth, afraid of what might happen if I let go of my father's legacy. He looked at Kofi, his eyes filled with a sorrow that spoke of generations of tradition. Kofi, the chief said, his voice steady, I see now that the time has come for you to take the lead. The village will need someone with the strength to break the cycle, to move beyond the past. I trust you. Kofi's heart raced as he absorbed the weight of the chief's words. In that moment, he understood. The village could no longer live in the shadow of the past. The drum, its power, and its curse had kept them trapped in time. It was time to break free. Thank you, Chief, Kofi said, his voice thick with emotion. I will not let the village fall. The chief nodded, the weight of the years seeming to lift from his shoulders. The future is yours now. Lead them well. Kofi stood there, feeling both the burden and the blessing of the moment. The chief's legacy would not be lost, but it would not define the future either. The sacred drum would remain a part of their history, but it was time for the village to step forward, to embrace change, to embrace the future. The struggle had ended. The village, though scarred by its past, could now move toward a brighter tomorrow. Kofi stood before the sacred drum, the weight of the decision pressing on his chest like a heavy stone. The moonlight streamed through the open door of the chief's hut, casting a silver glow over the ancient drum that had held the village's fate for generations. Amma stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She did not speak, for words were not needed in this moment. Their eyes met, and in them, they shared a quiet understanding. The time had come. I cannot bear to see my people suffer under the weight of the past any longer, Kofi whispered. It is time to let them go. With trembling hands, Kofi reached for the seal that had held the drum closed for so long. His fingers hovered over it for a moment, as though the drum itself could sense the enormity of the action. With a deep breath, he pressed down, breaking the seal. A low, mournful sound echoed from within the drum, as if it were mourning its own release. Amma's voice broke the silence. We must face the future, Kofi. Whatever comes, we will face it together. Kofi nodded, his heart pounding as he slowly lifted the lid of the sacred drum. The air grew still, heavy with the weight of the moment. As the drum opened, a rush of energy seemed to flow out, filling the hut, spilling into the village like a tide that could not be stopped. In that instant, a change swept over the land. The chief's life force, once tied to the drum, began to fade. The air, once thick with the village's unspoken fears, seemed to lighten. The curse, which had hung over the people like a dark cloud for so many years, began to dissipate. It was as though the very land was exhaling, releasing the burden it had carried for generations. The villagers felt it too. They looked around in confusion, unsure of what had just happened, but sensing that something had shifted. The sounds of the village, the murmurs of daily life, the calls of children playing, had changed, as though they had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The energy in the village was different now, lighter, yet filled with a deep, sorrowful understanding. In the quiet that followed, Kofi felt a sense of solemn responsibility settle upon him. The chief was no longer standing as the anchor of the village. With his passing, Kofi had to step forward, not just as a son of the village, but as its new leader. He felt the weight of the position, but it was not the weight of an old tradition. It was the weight of a future yet to be shaped. He stood tall, looking out over the gathered villagers who had silently witnessed the changing of the guard. Some faces were filled with grief, others with hope, and still others with uncertainty. The elders looked on, their approval still unsure, but their respect undeniable. Kofi raised his voice, firm yet gentle. Today we mourn the loss of our leader, he began, his voice steady. But we do not mourn the loss of the future. The drum has given us freedom from the past, and it is now our duty to move forward, together. We will rebuild, not in the shadow of what was, but in the light of what we can become. Amma stepped forward beside him, her voice echoing his. The past will always be part of us, she said. But we cannot remain chained to it. We must grow, adapt, and embrace the new. Only then can we truly honor our ancestors, by showing that we are strong enough to forge our own path. The villagers listened in silence, and for the first time in many years, they saw a glimmer of hope. Kofi and Amma stood united, the bond between them unspoken but clear. They would lead the village into a new era, one that honored the wisdom of the elders but was not shackled by it. They understood that tradition had its place, but progress was necessary for survival. The elders, though still uncertain, saw the strength in Kofi's words. They had watched him grow from a boy into a man capable of leading, and in that moment, they knew that he was ready. The village, though scarred by the passing of its chief, would rise again. This time, not with the weight of old curses upon it, but with the promise of a future that was yet to be written. Kofi, standing before his people, knew the path ahead would not be easy. There would be struggles, there would be doubts, but he was no longer afraid. He had chosen the future. He had chosen freedom, and the village, in its own way, had chosen him.